I'm Jordan Fischer. I am co-founder and managing partner of Xpan Law Group. I'm also an adjunct professor of law at the Thomas R. Klein School of Law. So really, when it comes down to the GDPR, here's the things you need to know. The European Union General Data Protection Regulation, which I'm going to now call GDPR, at its most base sort of level, is attempting to gain control over this explosion of data. We have data collected on us as individuals every second of every day. You have an iPhone, it's collecting data on you. It knows where you are, it knows the text messages that are coming into you, it knows how many times you've accessed it. The GDPR was really sort of came about to gain control and give that back to the data subject. So the GDPR has a strong extraterritorial impact, and that is because it not only applies to entities established within the EU, but it also applies to entities that are not established in the EU if they are providing goods and services to EU natural persons, or they're monitoring the behavior of EU natural persons. So it affects US-based entities or entities based all around the world, because if they are providing goods and services, and in that provision of goods and services, they are collecting EU natural persons' data, they are going to be required to comply. So the EU has consistently been much more data privacy oriented for a number of years. Prior to the GDPR, we had what we called the directive, the Data Protection Directive. And that directive laid out a lot of what became the GDPR. The difference between the directive and the GDPR is that the directive did not require companies outside of the EU to comply with its requirements, and it also didn't go as far as the GDPR goes. In addition to the directive, you also have the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is an EU-based charter, and this charter expressly lays out that privacy is a fundamental right. So this is sort of the framework that you have leading up to the actual creation of the GDPR. Now, 2 years ago, the GDPR was actually adopted, and it gave 2 years for the companies, governmental entities, sort of anyone who's collecting personal data to come into compliance. And now it goes into effect May 25th this year. There is a strong data minimization principle under the GDPR, which basically states you are to collect the least amount of information possible in order to provide the service for which you're collecting that information. The other area is looking at data retention. So the idea of holding onto data for years, decades, is really something that companies have to revisit. You can't just collect data willy-nilly. You're really gonna have to be collecting it for a discrete purpose and then get rid of it when you're done. When you're looking at the sort of proactive informing the consumer side of the GDPR, you are going to see much more transparency in what's being done. Now, there's transparency and then there's transparency. And each company is gonna have to make a strategic decision as to how transparent they're going to be. But you as a consumer are gonna have the right to go to that company and say, I wanna access everything you have on me. I wanna know who you're sending my data to, who you've shared my data with. And that's something that's really going to be transparent. How companies comply with that is gonna have to be something they look at from a technological standpoint, an administrative standpoint, and a legal standpoint. But the idea is that as a consumer, as a data subject, as an individual, we have a right to know what's being collected on us and then who has access to it. So the loaded question, will the United States do something similar to the GDPR? Will they do anything related to data privacy? The short answer is we don't know. Globally, beyond just Europe, we're seeing a lot more data protection regulations. So Canada has just come out with a draft regulation that's going to bring their data privacy regulations more in line with what's happening with the GDPR. Last year, we saw Japan, China, I believe Australia, and some Caribbean countries come out with what we're calling GDPR-esque data protection regulations. So right now, the United States is starting to look more like an outlier because globally, we are seeing data protection sort of take hold and grow and have a life of its own.